As you know, on Tuesday, I proposed $137.9 million of additional funding for our public schools, and the response from some legislators has been not surprising, but disappointing. The Republican chair of the House Education Committee says she doesn't think the situation is an emergency, and there's not enough money in the state budget at any rate. Well, there's enough money to provide tax cuts to millionaires, multimillionaires. The Senate tax bill yesterday, if you have an estate that's worth $5 million, you get a $338,000 tax cut. So there's a little money hanging around if people want to put it where it should, education. The chair of the Senate Education Committee from Republicans said, quote, "The truth is some school districts have not been realistic about how much they can afford to pay their employees and have entered into union contracts that are squeezing classroom budgets." Well, national data is that this Minnesota teacher salary on average is 2% below the national average in 2016. The fact is, the schools fell behind. We fell behind our obligation to schools from 2003 to 2012. Real state aid per pupil dropped by almost $2,000. We've brought 1,000 of that back, but not all of it. And that, combined with the shortfalls in special education at both the federal and state level, have left, as I said on Tuesday, many school districts in Minnesota very, very hard pressed, facing teacher layoffs and other support staff, extracurricular activities, school course offerings, and the like. So this is an emergency situation. This is a one-time funding that provides a tourniquet, and then the next governor and legislature can face the reality of chronic underfunding of our public schools. But in the meantime, I urge the legislature to pass this legislation, fit it into their existing budgets. If they snip away a few of those tax cuts from millionaires, multimillionaires, they'll have plenty of money to do this. With that, let me ask Commissioner Casellas to say a few words. Commissioner.
Thank you, Governor. Good morning. We're here this morning to talk about the urgent needs facing our schools and to highlight the plan the Governor put forward to address them. On Tuesday, I talked about the budget shortfalls schools districts across Minnesota are facing. Some of you in this room have asked, why now? Why has the crisis gotten so worse? The fact is, in spite of additional funding that schools have received during this administration, it's just backfilling the hole we started with. A hole that's the result of years of inadequate funding and even real cuts over the previous decade. The consequences of underfunding our schools are real. Districts are cutting art, music, technology, class sizes are getting bigger. We don't have enough counselors, social workers, or nurses in our schools. None of this is good for schools, for communities, and especially it's not good for our kids. The legislature says there's no money left, or that it's too late in the session to deal with this problem. I say, where there's a will, there's a way. Our budget reflects what we value, is what the governor often says. Well, we value our kids and our schools, and they should be put first. Who better to talk about this funding than the people who work with our kids every day and who are dealing with these incredible budget challenges? First up, I have Superintendent Dennis Lohmeyer. He's from Benson Public Schools. He's facing $300,000 worth of school cuts, and he would receive approximately $133,000 under the governor's proposal, in addition to the other funding that we put forward in the supplemental.
Thank you, Commissioner. My name is Dennis Lohmeyer, Superintendent at Benson Public Schools. Benson Public Schools is an outstanding rural district in western Minnesota. However, we're grappling with a $700,000 budget deficit for the next school year. Last evening, my school board met and considered action to reduce our budget by $300,000, which includes laying off teachers. In addition, they also plan to deficit spend and take funds from our fund balance of over $380,000. Our 5-year financial trend shows us approaching a zero fund balance and falling into statutory operating debt unless further reductions are made or significant additional revenue is received. The district cannot continue to deficit spend at this rate. Last year, the board reached a 3.5-year settlement, 3.5% yearly settlement increase with teachers. That includes salaries and health benefits. With the teacher shortage we're all experiencing, it's critical that Benson Public Schools pays competitive salaries to attract and retain outstanding teachers so that our district can continue to deliver world-class education to our students. Our local tax effort is solid also. Benson schools have a $1,200 per pupil operating levy in place, so Benson property taxpayers have done their part to support our school and high-quality opportunities to ensure students are prepared for college and careers and are competitive with peers throughout the state. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce Superintendent Joe Gothard. He's the new superintendent of St. Paul Public Schools. With a budget shortfall of $17.2 million, he would receive approximately $6.6 million under the governor's proposal.
Good morning, and thank you for being here today. On behalf of St. Paul Public Schools Board of Education, 38,000 students, 7,000 staff, and tens of thousands of parents, families, and engaged community members who support our schools, I want to thank Governor Dayton and Commissioner Cassellius. Governor, the announcement earlier this week of your support for $138 million in emergency funding comes at a time where SPPS is working to cut more than $17 million from our budget. And this comes on the heels of us cutting over $20 million in the 2 previous consecutive years. St. Paul Public Schools has a $42 million special education cross-subsidy, a nearly $20 million English language services cross-subsidy, and finally, a $22 million shortfall due to our per-pupil funding not increasing at the rate of inflation. This totals $84 million, an annual $84 million. This is at a time where we would prioritize or like to continue our work in college and career programs and pathways, ensuring that both our students are ready for college and the workforce that is so badly asking us to prepare a stronger workforce that's ready to go to work. Adequate special education and English learner programming. You know, in St. Paul Public Schools, we have 5,600 students who qualify for special education services, 11,400 who qualify for English language services. That's nearly, that's a large number, almost half of our students. Mental health services and support. We don't have to look far to see how schools around us have struggled to meet the needs of increasing mental health needs in our children and our families and our communities. We would like to continue to offer electives, interventions, and enrichments that are meeting the needs of students where they're at, personalizing and individualizing learning and making sure that it's relevant with the 21st century. The St. Paul Public Schools community also shares the priority of hiring, supporting, and retaining teachers of color. And we have proven practices with our urban teacher residency program. Our pre-K program has also flourished with support from state funds. We are able to target our most at-risk learners and increase the number of full-day enrollments. Our students are getting ready for kindergarten, and they're choosing to enroll in St. Paul Public Schools in kindergarten. We want to continue expanding our pre-K program. Governor Dayton's proposal of $6.5 million in additional funding for our fiscal year 19 budget will not cure the underfunding of Minnesota school districts. It will provide relief and soften some important decisions that me and my colleagues around the state will recommend to our boards before June 30th. Governor Dayton, thank you for making the lives of our youngest Minnesotans a priority. I am grateful. I'm hopeful that our House and Senate can hear us and know that their support would also help us greatly.
Thank you, Joe. Next is Matt Reuter, 3rd grade teacher at Goodview Elementary School in Winona Public Schools, facing $3.2 million over the last 2 years in budget cuts. They would receive approximately $476,000 under the governor's proposal.
Good morning. My name is Matt Reuter. I teach 3rd grade at Winona Area Public Schools. This year I have 17 students in my classroom, and I'll be honest, it's a good size for teaching 8-year-olds. We read in small groups every day, 4 or 5 kids at my desk, and when they're not at my desk, they're working on other activities. We have mostly hands-on science. We like going on field trips. We're proposing we have a field trip coming up in a few weeks where we're going to go on the river and look at the habitats of the animals in our local area. With 17, that's easy. It's easy to do, or it's easier to do when you have a smaller class size, but when you have math, all right, math lesson, I can get to those kids that I notice that are struggling, and if they fall behind. I'm a good teacher with 17 kids. Unfortunately, next year, it's proposed that we're going to have 28 students. I will have 28 students in my classroom next year if our budget situation doesn't improve. My first year teaching, that was 19 years ago, I had 29 fourth graders. That's what it could be like for me next year. Having nearly 38-year-olds in a classroom, it's going to be crowded, and it's going to be difficult to teach. Small groups won't necessarily be small groups anymore. There's only one of me to 28 kids, so I'd possibly have 7, 8 kids in a group. My table is not big enough to house 7, 8 kids to work with them in small groups. My science lessons aren't going to be nearly as fun because it's going to be more crowd control. I mean, could you imagine taking 28 third graders on the river looking at habitats? It's going to be harder to spot the signs of the students who are struggling. Right now my district had pink slipped or laid off 34 teachers at the end of this year. Most of them are probationary, but not all of them are. Some of them, most of them, hopefully will come back. Right now, our district's in a tight spot because we failed to pass a levy in November, and that levy wouldn't have been necessary if our state funded our schools adequately. The governor's proposal of $138 million in emergency school aid would send about $360,000 to my district. That would make a difference. And if I were in charge, I'd put every dime of it into smaller class sizes, keeping them down for the youngest kids. Smaller class sizes means better readers, better math students, and getting kids more fired up for science. You can't ask for a better return than that. So I urge the legislature to approve the governor's request. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Matt. Next up is Joy Whitbread. She's a high school teacher at Mora High School. Thank you for coming, Joy. And they'll be facing budget cuts of $650,000. They would receive approximately $251,000 under the governor's proposal.
Good morning. My name is Joy Whitbread, and I am from Mora, Minnesota. I teach American history and psychology in a district about the size of 1,700 students. About half of our students currently are in poverty, and at any given time, of those students in poverty, roughly 20 are homeless. Some of the greatest concerns we have in my district are the cutting of staff. Currently, we have 4 teachers who are retiring, but they will not be renewed. Another cut in our district will be of a math teacher who works in our math resource room. Our math resource room is an excellent asset to our district in that students who need additional help in math can go to that classroom at any time and receive any support they may need. This is critical when it comes time, especially this time of year, to passing those MCA tests. With that, a greatest concern in my district, due to the poverty and the mental health of our students, is we don't have a social worker. We did at one point, however, that social worker was cut. With these funds that Governor Dayton is proposing, it is imperative that we would now hire a social worker to fill the needs that our students have. The underfunding of the high school and other districts around the state has meant that due to retirements and all these cuts, we now have greater class sizes, and the needs of our students are not being met due to their high mental needs. We do our best, but honestly, we just don't have the resources to teach our content and then also go on and have private discussions with students regarding what is going on at home and how they are struggling. This one-time money that the governor's proposing will be a lifeline to all of us where we are now to the next 2-year budget. I hope this legislation passes and this emergency aid for schools will continue into the next legislation. Thank you.
Questions on this subject?
Governor, how hard are you going to push on that? Obviously, you've seen the pushback after your first news conference. Now you called a second one to keep pushing on this issue. How hard are you going to push on this?
Well, I'm going to push as hard as I can. Also need superintendents and teachers, parents to push as hard as they can as well. The fact that 3 of these representatives today came from Benson, Mora, Winona, and then certainly St. Paul shows how strongly they believe this money is imperative. When you hear the stories going from 17 to 28 students in 1 year, is just it's really heartbreaking. And you talk about kids that are in poverty and families struggling, and you know, when you see the human side of what we're talking about here, it's not, yeah, it's $138 million, but it's kids and families and teachers and administrators who are really dedicated and really doing their very utmost to contend with all the additional challenges that modern families and modern society puts in their laps every morning. And, you know, for the legislature to turn its back on this, I just think would be unconscionable. And I will do everything I can to, I don't get a vote there, but I'll do everything I can, and hopefully the public pressure will be such that they will see the light.
Specifically, the House education leaders said that this shortfall is because of the programs you have proposed that took money away from regular school programs, quote unquote. And in the Senate, the leader said it was because of union contracts.
Well, I've already responded on the union contracts. The average teacher's salary in Minnesota is 2% below the national average. The facts belie what she said. You know, it's very convenient for the legislature to blame everything and anything on me. The fact that we have all-day kindergarten and doesn't mean we don't have enough money to fund our first grade through 12th grade adequately. And I think she made a comment to the fact that if they knew how to manage their budgets better, they wouldn't have these problems. I just think those kind of comments about teachers and administrators are an insult to our schools and the people who work so very, very hard to make ends meet financially, but also provide the quality, the excellence of services that these schools are rightfully proud of and need to continue.
Do you have any indication that, given what we've heard today, that we're edging up close to what's happened in Arizona, what's happened in West Virginia with mass movements among teachers?
You know, I'm not going to compare us with other states. We're better educationally than virtually any other state, and but we have our own standard. I measure Minnesota compared to ourselves, and compared to the needs that are described out in the real world of our state.
Governor, the education chair in the House suggested that the legislature is going to offer one-time flexibility for school districts to tap into community ed reserves to paper over some of these gaps. Is that anything you'd be?
Well, the Republicans are great at having school districts borrow money from themselves, from the state borrowing money from them. I mean, what's wrong with real funding? We have a surplus in my budget proposal. We have a projected surplus in the last budget forecast. They got enough money to put into tax cuts for people who don't need them. Why don't they put more money into schools for people who do need them?
Other questions on this topic?
Thank you. I'll visit with you. Thank you very much.